we are making today pumpkin chocolate chip bread. So pumpkin chocolate chip bread is a quick bread, a type of quick bread. It requires a chemical leavener, right? So not yeast, therefore it rises really quickly. So it's considered a quick bread. Things that we'll need today, we need flour, baking soda, cinnamon, cloves, ginger, salt. All of that for you guys is together in one little container. You need your 2 eggs, sugar, brown sugar, pumpkin puree, vegetable oil, and chocolate chips. Okay, let's go ahead and get started. So my oven is on. It's preheating to 350. So make sure your oven's on. Make sure you go wash your hands if you have not. Okay. And we'll go ahead and get started. So whenever we're doing a quick bread, you want to make sure that, well, whenever you're cooking in general, you want to have your mise en place ready, right? So I have all of my ingredients here, I think, hopefully, and then all of my equipment plus some to show you guys a couple things. For quick bread, the most basic way is the muffin method. That's how we'll do it today. So we will sift together all of our dry ingredients. We'll mix together all our wet ingredients. We combine them, pour them in the pan, and voila. So this is a loaf pan. This is the type of pan we'll be using today. I would recommend greasing this. So if you have nonstick spray at home, you can use nonstick spray. The other way would be to take butter and just kind of like rub butter all around. Or if you guys don't have either of that, you can take a little bit of the oil, dip a clean like paper towel in some oil, not like in your measured oil, like pour a little bit of out, dip it, and then you can rub the oil around. That also works as well. I'm gonna go ahead. Pardon?
Can you angle your camera down?
Oh, yeah. Sorry. Thank you. Is that better?
Yeah, it is.
Okay. I just have to, I didn't pin myself to the screen, so I wasn't seeing what I was doing. Come on, thing, work. Just make sure that I have this set. Okay, so I think that should be good, yeah? Okay. All right, so let's go ahead and grease our pan. You want to make sure that things don't stick. I prefer the classic way of greasing with a little bit of butter and some flour. So I have a little bit of butter. You could use spray or you could use oil. Whatever you have, it doesn't really matter too much. Put that in my scrap bin. So just a little bit of grease, and a very classic, or like what you would do for a cake or anything like that, is you would grease it up like this, just kind of rub your butter around, and then you do a light dusting of flour. That really ensures a good non-stick situation. But I didn't give you guys butter, so if you just have the oil that is in your recipe, that's fine. Just take a tiny little bit and just rub it around. You don't even need a paper towel. You can just rub it with your fingers. That's also okay. All right, so just a little bit of butter there. Make sure you get the corners. And then what I'm going to do is take a little bit of my flour. Just a little bit. So this is like a classic way of greasing a pan for like a cake or anything. You rub butter and then dust with flour. and just a small little bit, and anything extra you can just tap out. You don't want a ton of flour in there, right? You don't want it to be like caked on, but it kind of should look like this. Okay. All right, so that's ready to go. So we can go ahead and get our ingredients measured. The first thing is 1 3/4 cup of all-purpose flour. So I have my bench scraper to level. You could use the back side of a knife, like a butter knife, or even like a paring knife or something. Not the side of the knife that has the dip in the blade, because then it would scoop into the cup, but the flat side of the knife, right? So we're going to spoon that in there and level it off. If you were to scoop it in and you didn't get enough, you could go ahead and kind of spoon it in with a bench scraper or a spoon until it's top. Just make sure that you don't shake it to compact it, and then just scrape it away. You can scrape it towards you if you need to fill in any holes, right? So this is, this is 1 cup of flour here. And then 3/4. So there are 2 ways that you could measure 3/4 of a cup. You could measure 1/4 3 times, or you could measure 1/2 a cup plus 1/4 of a cup. Either way works fine. Choose your own adventure. I'm going to do 1/4 of a cup 3 times because I have 1/4 of a cup. And I don't need to dirty a 1/2 a cup. Yes?
Is the one that you gave us already pre-measured out, or do we have to measure it?
It's already pre-measured for this recipe. For the biscuit recipe for tomorrow, it is not pre-measured. But for this recipe, yes, it's pre-measured. Okay, so 3/4 of a cup. Going to set my flour aside. All right, so we're mixing all of our dry ingredients together. So I have flour. I'm going to mix in my baking soda, cinnamon, nutmeg, cloves, and ginger and salt. For you guys, it's already portioned in that cup, everything together. For me, though, I have to do that. So baking soda comes in, a box like this. This is a chemical leavener. Baking soda is a base, so it needs an acid to react with to produce the carbon dioxide gas. And we need 1 teaspoon of baking soda. It's a little kind of crunchy in there. There we go. All right, so 1 teaspoon of baking soda. Just gonna sprinkle that into my flour. And then 2 teaspoons of ground cinnamon. You could also substitute like a pumpkin pie spice if you were to have that at home. I think purchasing pumpkin pie spice is totally unnecessary because you can just measure it yourself, and it's usually cheaper. So cinnamon, nutmeg. A little nutmeg goes a really long way. So this is just 1/4 teaspoon of nutmeg. Then we're going to do 1/4 teaspoon of cloves, also a pretty strong flavor. You don't want too much, right? Little goes a long way. The other thing about spices, so number 1, spices a little bit really can have a big impact in the dish. And number 2, they can go bad. So like if your parents or you guys at home have spices from like 10 years ago, probably time to get rid of them and like purchase some new ones because they do lose their flavor. If you keep them in a tin that's light proof, airtight, and away from like a main heat source, you will fare a little bit better with the longevity of your spice. And then last thing is 3/4 teaspoon of salt. So with salt, you can measure it sort of like how we measure 3/4 of a cup. You could do 1/4 teaspoon 3 times, or you could do 1/2 teaspoon plus 1/4. I'm going to do 1/2 plus 1/4. All right. Like so. Put this guy, do I need this? I'm going to leave that aside for now. So we have all of our dry ingredients in this bowl. There are a couple ways that we can sift. The first way would be through a sifter like this, right? This is just a classic sifter. You know, some people, you could sift directly into the bowl. You could sift into another bowl. You could sift as you're scooping, but it's really easy. You just pour everything in and just use the little lever. Some have a twist, and you go. So this is the way to sift. So it's just incorporating everything, removing the clumps. I definitely had some clumps. You guys at home don't have to sift, especially if you don't have any clumps. If you feel like you have clumps, then you probably should sift. If you don't have a sifter, you could use a fork. Hopefully everybody has a fork at home. And you could just use that fork to kind of mix things through like this. So another way would be just to use a whisk, right? A whisk mixes things up, adds a little bit of air. That's also a completely acceptable way, especially if it's something that doesn't call for sifted flour, right? Like if your recipe doesn't say anything about sifting, then you could just use a whisk or a fork to just kind of remove any lumps and to mix everything together. The third way you could sift is with your fine mesh sieve. So this hand stays rigid and you tap, 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 right? This is also a great way of like garnishing a plate, decorating a plate, something like that, right? Tap, 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 tap. This is what I do at home because I don't like having unnecessary ingredients. And look I have some little bits in there. So you can just push those through with a spoon. I think I said unnecessary ingredients. I mean unnecessary equipment, right? Like you don't need to have a big sifter if you have a fine mesh sieve, right? That you use for straining other things anyway. That's my belief at least. Okay, dry ingredients all mixed together. Now we're going to mix together our wet ingredients. So we have 2 eggs at room temperature is ideal. It's not 100% necessary. The other way of getting your eggs at room temperature would be just to run them under warm water, not hot water, just warm water for a couple minutes. But sitting out at room temperature for a little bit helps. So for cracking your eggs, flat surface, right? To ensure that you have a nice firm crack, you're not getting too many shells, you're not getting shells in or out of the bowl, you're not making a mess, just boom. And open your egg. Oh, that was a kind of a weak shell. Certain eggs will have different characteristics, like the quality of the egg, right? There, that one cracked much better. Okay. Keep our space clean. So I'm going to not use a whisk. I'm just going to use my spoon to mix everything together. Let's move this out of the way so you can see what I'm doing. Right now I just have eggs.
Okay.
But I'm going to add in my sugar to the eggs. So I know sugar looks like a dry ingredient, but a lot of times and you measure it like a dry ingredient, but it can function like a wet ingredient in the recipe. So most of the time you add the sugar into your wet ingredients because it can it dissolves, right? And it can, and it has certain properties where it like removes some of the, it kind of changes the way that the liquids act, right? Like it melts, it can dissolve, and it absorbs and kind of functions like a liquid. It doesn't take up the water, so it doesn't make things dry out. All right, so 3/4 of a cup. So we can do half a cup plus 1/4 of a cup, or you could do 1/4 of a cup 3 times. I'm gonna do 1/4 of a cup 3 times. because I don't have a half a cup over here. So 1, 2, 3. All right. And I can set that aside. All right, stir your sugar into your eggs. Like so. All right, now we're going to add in half a cup of brown sugar. So brown sugar has a little bit of acid in it from molasses, just a little bit, not a ton. But that acid is actually going to help react with the baking soda to give a little poof, a little lift, right? So whenever you're measuring brown sugar, you want to pack it really well. Where is my half a cup? Oh, I didn't even grab it. Okay, then we'll just use 1/4 of a cup 2 times. There you go. I always just use the bag. Like I scoop in the bag and then I use the bag to press it down. And so it should be really firm, and when you tip it out, it should look like a sandcastle, right? So, and if you notice, I'm not measuring directly over the bowl, right? Whenever I'm measuring stuff, I'm measuring over a separate bowl, the container that the flour is in, the container like of the spices. I'm not measuring over the bowl because I don't want to accidentally add too much and it ruin my whole batch of ingredients. So just mix this in. Right, everything's still nice and liquid. Whereas if this were flour, it would start to absorb the liquid and then it wouldn't appear wet anymore. Whereas the sugar works with the liquids to keep it as a wet ingredient, right? Sugar kind of melts into it. If you have any clumps of brown sugar, just making sure nice and mixed up. Now, brown sugar can go stale, like dry out really quickly, and get really hard. So what you want to do is just really secure it so that air doesn't get in. So I always take my brown sugar bag, I'll secure it with like a rubber band first, and then I wrap it in plastic. You could put it in like a container, like secure it with a rubber band and then put it in a container. That also works. Okay, so I have eggs, granulated sugar, brown sugar. Next thing we're going to add is our pumpkin puree. So you're going to use the whole can. So just dump that in. Give it a stir. I think this is the first pumpkin thing I've made all season, which is crazy because I freaking love pumpkin flavored stuff. Except I don't really like pumpkin spice lattes. I just like pumpkin flavored baked goods. All right, so I have my nice pumpkin mixture, yes? And then the last thing you add to the wets would be your oil. So we need, and the orange juice, a splash of orange juice. If you were at home and you didn't have orange juice, you could just use, like applesauce would work. You could use a little milk. The orange juice has a little bit of acid in it, right, which also helps to react. You could put maybe a splash of like apple cider vinegar to have a little bit of acid. It also adds a little bit of liquid, right? So we need, let's do our vegetable oil first, half a cup of vegetable oil. So get to eye level. And then stir in your vegetable oil. So be gentle, right, till it's absorbed. Don't stir too aggressively or it's going to go everywhere. You're going to make a big old mess. Okay. So in the Schitt's Creek episode, it was talking about folding, which is sometimes as I'm mixing, I almost do like a folding motion. It's this kind of like taking your spoon, cutting it in half, and then just lifting up and over. But a lot of it, it's just how you stir. So you stir and move the bowl in opposite directions, right?
Yes, I have a question. After the pumpkin, did you add anything else?
Yeah, I added the oil. So half a cup of vegetable oil.
And it's already measured out. That was like a lot of vegetable oil.
It's a lot of vegetable oil, yeah. I already measured it.
Thank you.
Uh-huh.
This smells like baby food though.
Because of the pumpkin.
Right? It does.
So you're gonna add the vegetable oil and then the orange juice. So a quarter cup of orange juice, which I didn't get out. So again, making sure that you get to eye level. It's just a splash, right?
This is the orange juice optional.
No, you kind of need it.
Because my sister's allergic to orange juice, and I kind of wanted her to taste it.
Oh, she's allergic to orange juice?
No, she's allergic to oranges in general. Like everything.
Yeah. Huh. Yeah, okay. No, you could leave it out. Maybe, do you have milk in your house?
Yeah.
Yeah, put in a quarter cup of milk.
A quarter cup. So 1 quart.
Yeah. Because then at least you'll get the liquid, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so now we have our wet ingredients and our dry ingredients. Okay, and what we're going to do is stir our wet ingredients into our dry ingredients. So making sure you get as much out of the bowl as possible. And then we're going to stir using that folding motion and kind of the reverse stirring. So like moving the bowl the opposite direction to the way that you're stirring. And a folding motion, again, is you take your spoon or your spatula and you kind of cut across and then fold. So it's like you cut down the middle and then you scoop and place on and you rotate 90 degrees. You don't have to fold everything, but it's a good motion to be able to do. So running along, scooping sort of towards the side of the edge and then placing that on top.
I have a question.
Yes.
Do you put wet? Okay, so wet into dry, right?
Yeah, wet into dry.
I thought that was your. But okay.
Wetting to dry, yeah. So, and then just stir until everything's incorporated. Don't overmix. It doesn't need to be 100% smooth, okay? So that's where people get tripped up is they'll like mix the crud out of it because they see like inconsistencies. It's not the super smooth batter. And then you overdevelop the gluten and then it can be a little kind of like dense and chewy. Okay, and then lastly, we're gonna fold in gently our chocolate chips. So we need, it's like 2/3 a cup of chocolate chips. So kind of about like that. I'm gonna sprinkle them on there. Move all that out of the way. And then just fold those chips in. So again, being gentle, right? Don't overmix this. That cutting, scoop along the side of the bowl and then fold it on top. fold it on top. Moving the bowl in the opposite direction as you're folding. So certain recipes, like especially for cakes, they'll have you add the sifted flour, like the sifted dry ingredients, into the liquids and like slowly fold it in. But for the most part, it's easier to add the liquids to the dries. You can like make a well in the center too. Sorry, I didn't really say that. I kind of did that naturally, but making a well in the center, so like a little dip in the dry ingredients and then pouring the wets in there and then stirring. You could also pour in half, fold a little bit and pour in the other half if you felt uncomfortable. But so this is how your batter should look. It's like thick, not crazy thick, kind of like a thick pancake batter maybe, or like waffle batter or something. And then we just put it in our pan, right? So our prepared pan, and you want it to fill up pretty high, okay? You want a lot of stuff in there because otherwise you're gonna have little small, it should be like a hearty loaf, right? Otherwise it's gonna be pretty flat and it'll cook a lot quicker, which is fine. But you really wanna fill your pan pretty full, okay? So my pan's not the biggest, but, and then you can just kind of smooth it out on the top. But it's almost full, right? It's like half an inch, 3/4 of an inch from the top, so pretty full. Looks so good. Yum, yum, yum. A lot of times what people do is, which is not correct for certain things. It doesn't matter too much, but like if you've just folded in all of these ingredients to try to keep the air, and then you put it in like a cake pan, and people will like tap their cake pan, sometimes you don't want to do that because it can collapse all these beautiful air bubbles you work to develop. Yeah, so, and then you just put it in the pan, and then we're gonna pop it in the oven. Middle of the oven, you don't want it too high to the top because this takes a while to bake, 45 minutes probably, sometimes even longer. And so if it's too close to the heating element to the top of the oven, even if your heat's coming from the bottom, heat rises, it's gonna bake on the top too quickly and you could get a burned top, and then that's sad, and then it can be raw in the middle. So you wanna put it in the middle of the oven. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and pop this guy in the oven. Eee, look at that, beautiful. So the swivel's following me, I think. Wait, sorry, hold on. I didn't hear your question. What's up?
I said, do you want us to put it on the second rack in the oven or just the first one in the middle?
Well, it kind of depends how your oven's laid out, like where the racks are in your oven. Just somewhere in the middle, right? Like it could be like in my oven here in school, it's a little bit lower to the bottom because I only have 2 racks. And so I'm going to put it on the lower rack, not the top rack.
Okay.
Just somewhere in the middle. And that's it.
Miss, how long do we bake it for?
It's about 45 minutes. So why don't you set a timer for 45. So like it's 9:30 right now. I'll probably check Maddie at 10, maybe rotate it. Just make sure it's not over baking. And then if it starts to look too brown, in 30 minutes, I might lower the temperature a little bit, but it'll probably take about 45 minutes to bake. So towards the end of class. That was a faster lab. Cool. That means we have time to do things. All right, I'm gonna end.